Morning, everybody. We are gathered in the Supreme Court today to call to the bar of Ireland graduates of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, and I'm joined on the bench by my colleagues, the President of the High Court, Ms Justice Mary Irvine, and Mr Justice John McMenamin. And I'd also like to welcome those who are, I think for the first time ever, attending a call to the bar remotely. I know that it is perhaps a matter of some regret to those who would wish to have been here as guests of those who are about to be called, that we were unable to accommodate others in the room this morning. But I was anxious that everyone who wanted to be called physically in this historic Supreme Court room would be able to do so. And given social distancing restrictions, we can only accommodate 10 people in the room. And in those circumstances, it would have been impossible within the time frame to spread out the calls in such a way as would have allowed guests to be here. But I hope that those who are observing this ceremony remotely will at least have a significant flavour of what is happening here. And it is, for obvious reasons, a most unusual call to the bar. But I was anxious, even though we are operating under those restrictions, to ensure that those who wish to go through this traditional ceremony will be able to do so in a manner that doesn't differ from the norm to any greater extent than was mandated by current conditions. The arrangements made have been assessed by the Court Service Health and Safety Department as being compliant with government regulations and guidance. And I hope that for all of the restrictions, those of you who are to be called to the bar will appreciate the proceedings. This is a short, formal ceremony, but it is one of great significance. The call to the bar signals an important step in the life of each graduate. It may mark your first step towards practicing at the bar, which is a challenging and demanding profession, but one which has the potential to offer a very satisfying career. Today you join a profession with a long history, but one which is, in my view, also of considerable contemporary relevance. Membership of the profession brings with it a duty to promote and uphold the rule of law. Now, John Philpott Curran was an inspirational Irish barrister who practiced over 200 years ago, and a speech of his in 1790 is the root of the famous quotation that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And his words, in my view, summarise the raison d'etre of the legal profession in a democratic society and the work that lies ahead of each barrister in defending liberty and promoting the rule of law. I mentioned earlier that the bar remains a profession of considerable importance in contemporary Ireland. The existence of an independent legal profession to put forward the cases of litigants before the courts is a vital part of our legal system. The role of an independent judiciary in maintaining the rule of law would be significantly impaired if that independent judiciary did not have available to it a truly independent legal profession, prepared to undertake difficult and indeed sometimes unpopular cases in a way that ensures that the judge or jury ultimately has all of the facts and arguments available to come to a just conclusion in accordance with law. And in that context, it's vital that you maintain a thorough knowledge of the law, not just for the purposes of advising your clients, but also for the purpose of assisting the court in ensuring that the law is properly applied. Now, I think your presence here today confirms that you have demonstrated a thorough knowledge of the law, but in a constantly evolving legal framework, it's vital that you renew and extend that knowledge as your practice develops. And it's also of the utmost importance that you adhere to the highest ethical standards. Our court system is dependent on judges being able to trust counsel, and once that trust is lost, it's very hard to restore. And it's important to remember that the perception by the public of the profession of barrister depends on the experience which clients and others have in their individual encounters. As barristers, your first obligation is, of course, to your own client, to be courageous but courteous in the way in which you advance that client's case, but also to do so within the bounds of the rules of ethics and your duties to the court. And with that being said, I will now call each graduate individually to the Bar of Ireland. Diarmuid O'Leary. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Ciara Bernice Landy. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Cian Henry. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Sean Beattie. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Aoife Donnan. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Rachel Sweeney. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Daniel O'Mahony. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Gregory Murphy. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Ali Bracken Zaid. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Gillian O'Hanlon. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Now, each graduate having been called to the Bar of Ireland is entitled to practice in all of the courts of Ireland, including here in the Supreme Court. And to illustrate this new status, I will ask each newly called member of the Bar whether they wish to say anything before the court this morning. Mr. O'Leary, do you move anything? Ms. Landy, do you move anything? Mr. Henry, do you move anything? Mr. Beattie, do you move anything? Ms. Donnan, do you move anything? Ms. Sweeney, do you move anything? Mr. O'Mahony, do you move anything? Mr. Murphy, do you move anything? Mr. Zaid, do you move anything? Ms. O'Hanlon, do you move anything? Now that concludes this short but important formal ceremony of call to the Bar of Ireland. On my own behalf and on behalf not just of those members of the Supreme Court who are here, but the many others who would in more normal times also be here, I wish to extend congratulations to each of the newly called barristers and wish them every happiness and success in the future.